But let's frame out deficits for a second, okay? Deficits in the context of what I talk about is think of it as eyeglasses, right? Deficits in eyesight requires a tool like eyeglasses to manage, right? So when I talk about deficits in eyesight, I'm not talking about something that can't be managed, right? So when we talk to our children about deficits, I don't want to be special ed. It's not about looking at it as a negative, right? It's about you can't see, buddy, right? You struggle with eyesight. Glasses serve a purpose. So we're going to start looking at these deficits through tools and strategies to help our children see a way to manage life a little differently. Okay? But self-regulation is a fundamental conversation point. You have to see our children through the lens of self-regulation. Okay? And conceptualize it in kind of 4 categories. Right? So you have this struggle with attention. Right? So you have attention or focus, right? Or attention or inattention as the diagnosis will go. Self-regulation and emotion. Right? Feeling productive is an emotion. Feeling unproductive is an emotion. How many of your children hate to read? Yeah, that's crazy, but true. I mean, with such a visceral kind of reaction, they hate to read. And that's a huge concern, especially when they're really good at it. Thinking and thoughts, like how I self-regulate my thoughts, is a journey, right? It's a life journey. Even obviously as adults, we're like, man, I can't control my thoughts to save my life. But it's a necessary journey, and I'm going to talk about metacognition as part of how do we help them tap into their understanding of their own thoughts. And then behavior. Behavior is what we see. What does it look like, right? How am I regulating my response, or how am I not regulating my response? It's like it's how you see hyperactivity, right? It's that H. It's how do I shape my own behavior and catch myself, right? The other way to look at, so this is kind of like the kind of the cognitive aspect of this conversation of deficit, but then we can see deficit through executive function, right? And you've heard that term a lot. And these are, from the research standpoint, in a lot of ways, this is like what you'd say is kind of behavioral trait characteristics. So these are things that we can categorize, right? And throughout this presentation, I'm not going to be saying I'm now going to talk about flexibility. I'm not, but I'm going to interweave these constructs within the presentation. Okay. So I'm not going to talk too much about this. This is its own presentation, its own workshop about what this all looks like and what it means. I'd rather pass by this and start getting into more practical stuff. So, but hold your questions, write them down, and I'll tap into anything you have about this slide or any other slide as we go through. Okay. So deficits in executive function. My child may or may not have significant deficits in all of these areas, but they may have in a couple. What I'll do with children is I'll go through all of this. And I'll talk about what it looks like. And I have other slides that operationally define them. And then I'll say, here's what it looks like for children. And then they have to go through and do the same thing. And then as an outcome, we kind of operate, we number them, which ones are the most significant in their life. It's kind of helpful, because it's not necessarily across the board for every kid. Some are more pronounced than others. I found, so Russell Barkley, who, if you've done any YouTube video watching or reading, Russell Barkley is a kind of pioneer in the ADHD world. He's pretty brash and takes hardline approaches to recommendations, but I find this an extremely powerful quote, because it not only interweaves Sarah Ward's work, which I know she's been here a couple times, but it really highlights just how significant it is to train and practice and consistently create opportunities to build the skills required to overcome or manage the deficits in executive function, and to take a multi-sensory approach, seeing, feeling, interacting. It's really, really, really powerful. Okay? It doesn't make it any easier, but it really the truth to just how challenging their world is, right? And how much support they may actually need in guiding them through the challenges and helping them adopt tools and strategies to see life differently. Because if we don't, the symptoms will, for many cases, the symptoms will perpetuate, right? And we'll see evidence that they start to identify with. And this is the fear we're all here for, right? We do not want to let our children start to identify with their own faults, right? I mean, in a way that they start to identify with disorder, and they start to identify with chaos, and they start to identify with stupidity. This is not the result of being dumb. We know that. It's the result of incomplete tasks, right? Disorganization in managing a long-term project. Had nothing to do with intelligence or capabilities. Give him a test. He'll ace it. Right? Because they are learning. It's just they may not be performing in all categories, and the results can sometimes be pretty damaging emotionally, right? The symptoms can feel pretty awful. And most kids with executive function deficit or ADHD, they get their ass kicked every day. They go into school every day, right? And they get reminded every day, multiple times, that they got some things wrong, right? School doesn't come easy. Life doesn't come easy. They have to grind it out. And I typically pat them on the back every morning they walk out that door to take it on again. That takes some grit. Just no one tells them that, right? No one helps them see that. But that's where the gift of ADHD truly exists, right? It's the grittiness of managing the chaos of life and pretending like it all is rosy. Meaning typically they're amazing kids with a great personality, great energy, big hearts, right? And they continue to persevere with symptoms like that, or symptoms like that, or symptoms like that, right? But this is the game we're trying to help them reorganize and reshape. They're good at this, meaning they may have a tendency to be okay with disorder. And that's not a bad thing, right? Because they're not that stressed about life all the time, right? I mean, they can walk into this room, be just fine. You, on the other hand, me, I mean, I can't even go in that room anymore. Like, I gotta find a new room, right? So it's helping them see their way through routines to build an ability, to build a self-identity with another way. That's it. And give them options in life. Okay? So, it gets worse, unfortunately, for this generation. It was easier for us to self-regulate. Okay? Let's just imagine all of us here are undiagnosed ADHD, right? But when we were kids, it was easier to self-regulate. Did you have social media in your bedroom? And could you go on and chat with anybody at any time? Could you go onto YouTube and just crush through some video clips instead of writing your paper? No. So it's just that much worse. And research is starting to come out that is... Can you guys see this? Oh, brutal. Brutal.
Excuse me, is this on your website? This
Yes.
slide deck?
Yeah, well, you can log in to my website. I can pass this around so you guys can just log in. And the slide, you can just log in and just download it. This is a summary of the slides I'm about to show. So the trends, there's so many interesting trends. Now I'm trying to be non-judgmental here. So I'm trying to just imagine this generation is like the 60s and the 70s. Like there's always criticism about new things like rock and roll and, LSD, and they have to figure out what the goods and bads were of it, right? But, always the parents are the ones looking back and criticizing, it's going to rot your brain, rock and rolls for crazy people. But I'm trying to be non-judgmental in this, but it's shocking, the trends, right? So over 80% of children, what's the age on this? 14 or over, have a smartphone. You've crossed a critical mass, which now you're starting to shape cultural norms. right? And you're seeing it play out in your children. There's been such a significant, look at this decrease in kids that actually want to get their license. What was a milestone when we were kids? A license. Like, it is non-existent. It's just the give-a-shit factor about that significant milestone is not really there. Not really there. The sleep factor is significant, and if you want to get into working memory, significant, right? Because how do you turn it off? If you already lack self-regulation skills, how are you going to turn that off? You're not. You don't want to miss anything. Hanging out with friends. This top lines, high schoolers, and then it just goes down in grade level. Hanging out with friends. What did you want to do more than anything? You wanted to hang out with your friends. What did you work your butt off for during the work week? So you could go out with your friends on Saturday night. Everything defined that. Not anymore. Not anymore. The less dating. Of course, the less dating equates to less sex. Right? It's just so interesting how these trends, and the line is steep. I just find it fascinating that this generation, with the implementation of technology, has shifted things that we found so valuable that it defined our time. Defined our time. And obviously, when you take away the social interactions, you obviously have an increase in feelings of loneliness. Right? We're social creatures. We hang out with each other. It serves an emotional purpose. The result of that, and I didn't put that slide in, the result of that is also spikes in anxiety, incidences of depression, incidences of poor coping strategies. Right? I totally, if I had time, I would read quotes from this book that I just grabbed. It's just so informative. Again, try not to be judgmental. It's so informative, and we're at a place right now that we know enough now.